Before we dive into the subject of evolution, a word or two about the topic itself. When we think about the teachings of theosophy, or indeed spiritual philosophy generally, we don't often think about evolution. It seldom appears in the lists of key points, or perhaps gets only a minor mention. And yet, H.P. Blavatsky, or HPB for short, refers to it frequently in her writings, and especially in her major work, The Secret Doctrine. In fact, the 2 volumes of this mammoth work are virtually entirely about evolution, describing a vast scheme of cosmic evolution in Book 1 and human evolution in Book 2. In this talk, I've drawn mainly on H.P. Blavatsky's writings in The Secret Doctrine and her other works, and sometimes from other works such as Pablo Sender's articles on evolution and Geoffrey Farthing's Deity, Cosmos and Man, which are in turn mainly Blavatsky-based. I'll give you an outline of the talk. Talk a bit about the physical evolution, first of all, and then the theosophical view, of which is that physical evolution is a reflection of spiritual evolution. And then I'll bring in the fundamental propositions of H.P. Blavatsky, which I think of as the building blocks of evolution. And then a little bit about spiritual evolutionary processes. And most of this talk is, as you'd expect, about inner or spiritual evolution, as set out by H.P. Blavatsky. And then focusing more on the spiritual evolution of mankind, a little bit about chains, rounds, and root races, which will be familiar to most theosophists, but perhaps not to non-theosophists. But it's basically the structure of the history of mankind and its predecessors, if I can put it like that. And then something about the future before us, and summary and conclusion. I mean, I've discovered in preparing for this talk that this really is a vast subject, and we've only time to touch on some of the aspects of this, such as chains and rounds. If I seem to be repeating myself sometimes, it's because most of these topics actually overlap. Everything is interconnected, and there are many different aspects of each. So physical evolution, to start with that then. It's traditional for talks to start with a dictionary definition. So here's the definition for physical evolution. Evolution is the process by which the physical characteristics of types of creatures change over time. New creatures develop and others disappear. And that's from the Cambridge Academic Dictionary. So this is interesting. Charles Darwin published his seminal work, The Origin of Species, 165 years ago to the day, in 1859, which was only 16 years before the Theosophical Society was founded. So today is actually World Evolution Day, in case you didn't know that. And I can assure you that there was no planning of that involved here. It was just sheer chance. Based on his Darwin's observations of changes in species over time, partly resulting from his famous voyage in the Beagle, Darwin proposed that natural selection, or survival of the fittest, results in animal populations evolving over time. So here's a photo of Darwin. Not the usual photo with the white beard. He looks quite determined and self-confident, as indeed he had to be. As we know, Darwin's theories created a storm of controversy, especially as they conflicted with the Church's ideas of creation. A particular issue was whether man was created separately from the rest of nature, or whether humans were the result of the same evolutionary processes as every other living thing. I'm not going to go into that particular set of issues today because I haven't really got time. But modern science has largely confirmed Darwin's thesis of natural selection as a key cause of biological evolution. Going forward, it's interesting to see some examples of the sheer variety and wonder of natural forms resulting from evolution. So here we have an iridescent blue butterfly. Or is it? Actually, the butterfly's wings shown are not blue. They only look blue because of their structure. There is no blue pigment in the wings. The multi-layer thin film structures that make up a butterfly wing produce a bright iridescence from reflected sunlight. This iridescence is due to thin film interference, scattering and diffraction of the wavelengths of light caused by multi-layer structures. How did nature know how to develop a diffraction grating, as scientists call it, which depends on wavelengths of light? Orchid flowers look like monkey faces, perhaps to prevent them from being eaten by monkeys. But how did this come about? How did flowers get to know what monkey faces looked like? The hummingbird and the flower are adapted to one another, and both depend on each other for food on the one hand and spreading of pollen on the other. This sort of codependency is common in nature. These plants are adapted to living in the most arid environment on the planet, which is the Atacama Desert in Chile, by taking advantage of rainfall as much as 7 years apart to bloom and set seed. There are many other examples of nature adapting to live in some of the most extreme environments on the planet. Esoteric philosophy says that life is everywhere, even where there is apparently none. This coral reef gives an idea of the variety of life colonizing the world's oceans. You can see from all these that there's an extraordinary variety of form and function developed by life on Earth, exploiting every known environment and using an almost infinite variety of methods to do it. For example, echolocation in bats, birds which use the stars and the Earth's magnetism to navigate, eels which use electricity to defend themselves, forest trees which communicate with each other, bacteria and viruses which have colonized extreme chemical and temperature environments, and so on. And we're still learning from nature to this day. We sometimes forget to include ourselves as part of evolution. HPB has much to say about the place of man in the scheme of things. Looking at the extraordinary variety, inventiveness, and resourcefulness of nature, we are prompted to ask, can all this really be the result of mechanical processes such as natural selection, or is there something else behind it? So, the theosophical view. Evolution through natural selection is the mechanism, but what drives it? The theosophical view acknowledges the mechanisms of physical evolution, but says that this is driven by the inner spirit and consciousness inherent in all things. There is constant pressure from the spirit within to develop instruments through which it can manifest its potentialities. Everything in nature works from the inside outwards, and this is our common experience. For example, everything that man creates has first to be brought into being or planned on the mental plane before it can be expressed as a physical form. The potter fashioning a pot at a wheel starts with a mental image of the pot. Or an architect planning for a building. Every man-made form starts off as a mental image. What holds good for things we create is the same in nature. All physical forms are modelled on other planes, according to spiritual archetypes, which are timeless. Esoteric philosophy holds that the cosmos is far more complex than the mechanistic view of scientific theory, with different dimensions that are out of reach of physical science. Biological evolution is an outward expression of the unfolding spirit within. HPB, or H.P. Blavatsky, says, "The whole order of nature evinces a progressive march towards a higher life. There is design in the action of the seemingly blindest forces. The whole process of evolution with its endless adaptations is a proof of this." In these 3 sentences, HPB succinctly states the esoteric view of the cause of evolution. There is design in the action of the seemingly blindest forces. He goes on, everything in the universe throughout all its kingdoms is conscious, that is, endowed with a consciousness of its own kind and on its own plane of perception. The key part of this is that everything is conscious in its own way. Scientists are now coming round to this idea. The scientific theory of panpsychism, that mind as a fundamental and ubiquitous feature of reality, is now gaining quite widespread credibility in the scientific community. Recent interest in the hard problem, hard for scientists that is, of consciousness, and developments in the fields of neuroscience, psychology, and quantum mechanics have led to increased interest in the theory of panpsychism in the 21st century. But what underlies this pressure to evolve? What are the building blocks of evolution? HPB's fundamental propositions come in here. The answer to the question about the building blocks of evolution lies in the 3 fundamental propositions which HPB set out in the Secret Doctrine. In HPB's words, these fundamental conceptions underlie and pervade the entire system of thought represented by esoteric philosophy. In terms of the first fundamental proposition, the circle with no beginning and no end represents the one reality, the absolute that underlies everything, the causeless cause. There's a well-known quote attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Hermes, which is that God, or the one reality, is an infinite sphere, the centre of which is everywhere, the circumference nowhere. For the present purpose, you'll have to make do with this circle, but you get the idea. So I'll just use my magic laser pen now. Cosmic ideation, or consciousness, and cosmic substance, or matter, are 2 aspects of the one reality. Cosmic ideation supplies the guiding intelligence for the vast scheme of cosmic evolution. HPB tells us that the 2 aspects of the absolute are essential to the manifested universe. Cosmic ideation, or consciousness, could not manifest as individual consciousness without a vehicle of matter. Consciousness or spirit on the one hand and matter on the other are 2 sides of the same coin. The manifested universe is therefore pervaded by duality, and Fohat is the mysterious link between the 2. 3 cosmic root substance underlies all the objective planes of nature and forms the vehicles which allow consciousness to be individualized. Oops. Bear with me a minute. Fohat is the bridge. Here's Fohat. Fohat is the bridge by which the ideas existing in the divine thought are impressed on cosmic substance as the laws of nature. Fohat is thus the dynamic energy of cosmic ideation. Why is all this relevant? This is the structure within which evolution and indeed the universe works. The third fundamental proposition emphasized the fundamental identity of all souls with the universal oversoul, and the obligatory pilgrimage of every soul or monad through the cycle of incarnation, including every elemental form of the phenomenal world. The monad comprises spirit, Atma, and the spiritual soul, Buddhi, and when joined in man by manas, or mind, becomes the permanent reincarnating ego. Thus, the third fundamental proposition sets out the evolutionary task of every divine monad: pass through every elemental form, driven first by natural impulse and then by self-induced efforts. The following diagram illustrates this. Just to read that again, the third fundamental proposition states the fundamental identity of all souls with the universal oversoul, and the obligatory pilgrimage for every soul through the cycle of incarnation, or necessity, in accordance with cyclic and karmic law. We start off with pure spirit, unconscious spirit, what I call plain vanilla spirit. The potentiality of spirit, which is to be made manifest by the process of evolution, must first become involved in matter. This dual process of involution and evolution is described symbolically as the descent of spirit into matter and its ascent out of matter. Geoffrey Farthing says that this is portrayed in religious mythologies as the incarnation, death, and resurrection of the divine Son. We can see here the involutionary part of the cycle, with the monad progressing through the three elemental kingdoms. And then at the base of this circle, it ensouls the mineral kingdom and then starts on its upward journey through the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, and then becomes individualized in man. And there's, looking further on, the progression to Jnani Chohans. Jnani Chohans are divine intelligences charged with supervision of the cosmos. What lies beyond the Jnani Chohans we don't know, but we have not heard of a limit to evolution. We'll look at this in more detail in the next section, which is about spiritual evolutionary processes. The following slides deal with some aspects of the spiritual evolution of the monad in the pre-human stages. As we've already discussed, the evolutionary path of the monad follows the sweep of the life impulse through manifestation in physical matter, then the vegetable kingdom, followed by the animal kingdom. HPB clarifies that the monad in the mineral kingdom is not individualized, but simply part of the tidal wave of spiritual evolution passing through that arc of its circuit. She says that the monadic essence begins to imperceptibly differentiate towards individual consciousness in the vegetable kingdom. HPB tells us that the tendency towards segregation into individual monads is gradual, and in the higher animals comes almost to the point. Following diagram, courtesy of Pablo Sender, illustrates this process. So, the diagram shows the journey of the divine spark or monad, which goes from minerals to human self-awareness. There's mineral through plant, animal, and human. The monad starts its journey in minerals and plants, developing basic physical traits, which are illustrated here, the physical, etheric, and vital. It then moves to animals, developing emotions, and we have the karma, K-A-M-A, karma, or desire body here. And finally, in humans, the monad connects with the mental plane, manas, and develops an individual mind or soul. Sorry, mind and soul. Thus, the monad evolves from simple existence to conscious individuality, which allows for self-awareness and spiritual growth. In the diagram, we can see the light of the one monad overshadowing, that's HPB's term, overshadowing the different kingdoms of nature. Notice the reflection of the one monad becoming more and more differentiated and separated as we go down through the kingdoms. And here we have illumination evenly distributed. This is the overshadowing. Pockets of brighter light, almost separate reflections, and bright and separated reflections. The presence of the monad in minerals is the whole kingdom. For plants, it's whole species. For animals, it's groups of individual animals. And in humans, of course, it's individualized. It's important to emphasize that the evolutionary progress of the monad illustrated in the previous diagram proceeds in cycles. There are cycles within cycles, each itself composed of smaller ones. The cycles take the form of spirals, since evolution always proceeds upwards. And you may even see the spiral on the background of this slide, which is actually a staircase. HPB sets out the scheme of cycles and spirals for human evolution in some detail in terms of chains, rounds, and root races, which we'll touch on a bit later in the talk. This is all in line with HPB's second fundamental proposition that the universe operates in cycles. Forms in which the monad manifests develop in complexity and refinement to reflect the unfolding of the monad itself and its progressively expanding consciousness. So the monad starts as an emanation of pure unconscious spirit from the logos, but gradually develops consciousness. HPB identifies three interwoven evolutionary schemes in nature. First of all, the monadic or spiritual, which we've just spoken about. Secondly, the intellectual. Pablo Sender says that here HPB does not refer to the brain intellectualism, but rather to the source of spiritual intelligence in man, the manasa jnani in us, or human soul. And then the physical evolutionary scheme. HPB says that nature, the physical evolutionary power, could never evolve intelligence unaided. She can only create senseless forms. Each of these three schemes is ruled and guided by the highest jnani chohams, divine intelligences which conduct the process of the cosmos. All three evolutionary schemes are inextricably intertwined at every point, and all three are represented in the constitution of man, which we'll come on to in a moment, after I've had a drink. And the following notes are taken from Pablo Sender's article, There's No Psychological Evolution, and summarize the changes in the monad as it passes through the kingdoms of nature. The universal monad, as distinct from human, is undifferentiated spiritual essence, which is unconscious on the planes of differentiated matter. Bit of a mouthful that, but I think if you read it again, you'll get it. Monad is awakened to consciousness in passing through the lower kingdoms of nature. So then it progresses from unconscious to consciousness. In man, the monad gathers experience personally and individually with the aim of developing spiritual self-consciousness, but is nevertheless an inseparable part of the whole. So now it's time to look at the spiritual evolution of mankind. And we're passing from generalized spiritual evolution to the stage of human evolution. Man occupies a critical stage in these evolutionary processes, where the spiritual aspects and the material aspects of being are equal. Hitherto, matter was in the ascendant, but after it, the spiritual begins to hold sway. We see that battle between the material and spiritual aspects of man played out every day and in every person, and dare I say it, in ourselves. The unconscious evolved the universe only in the hope of attaining clear self-consciousness, of becoming, in other words, man. This is a rather interesting quote attributed to the German philosopher Hegel from the Secret Doctrine. It seems to indicate that the whole purpose of the universe is for the evolution of consciousness, and specifically self-consciousness. This explains the hidden Kabbalistic meaning of the saying, the breath becomes a stone, the stone a plant an animal, the animal a man, the man a spirit, and the spirit a god. As we've heard earlier, in the third fundamental proposition, HPB refers to the obligatory pilgrimage for every soul through the cycle of incarnation in accordance with cyclic and karmic law. It's only by incarnating in physical form that spirit, or the monad, can obtain the experience necessary for development of consciousness and self-consciousness. This is another quote from the Secret Doctrine. No independent conscious existence is possible before the soul has passed through every elemental form of the phenomenal world and acquired individuality, first by natural impulse, and then by self-induced and self-devised efforts, checked by its karma, thus ascending through all the degrees of intelligence, from mineral and plant up to the holiest archangel. This underlines the importance of experience in the physical realms for the development of consciousness. The unique position of man is highlighted in this paragraph from the Secret Doctrine. Every form on earth and every speck or atom in space strives in its efforts towards self-formation to follow the model placed for it in the heavenly man. Its, the atom's, involution and evolution, its external and internal growth and development have all one and the same object, man. Man as the highest physical and ultimate form on this earth, the monad in its absolute totality and awakened condition, as the culmination of the divine incarnations on earth. I thought it's worth quoting this paragraph in full because it sets out so clearly the prime position of man as the highest physical form on this earth, and spiritually the individualized and self-conscious monad. Note that HPB says the highest physical form, which of course doesn't rule out higher spiritual or non-physical beings. We now go on to look at the constitution of man. Focusing first on the permanent individuality, or ego. Atma is the universal spirit, and Buddhi is the spiritual soul, or the vehicle of Atma. Together they form the monad. In man, the monad is joined by the higher mind, or manas. Mind is divided into two aspects: lower, the thinking, rational, calculating mind, and higher, the intuitional or formless. The higher mind forms the seat of the permanent individuality in association with Atma and Buddhi. It is immortal and the reincarnating entity. Then we have personality. This exists for the duration of the incarnation and dies shortly after the death of the body. Lower mind, manas, and the animal soul, karma, which is the seat of the animal desires and emotions, tend to be intertwined to a greater or lesser degree during life. Then we have vitality, prana, the life principle of vital energy, and the etheric body, the linga sharira, which is the blueprint for the physical body and is near physical, and the physical body itself, which is known in Sanskrit as sthula sharira. It's important to emphasize that this isn't a layer cake. All of these principles interpenetrate each other and are focused around the physical body during life. Why is the constitution of man relevant to this talk, I hear you ask? The answer is that it gives the basis of understanding of the evolution of man through the cycle of reincarnation. HPB says that it is the monad which propels forward and forces evolution in man, together with, in the earlier stages, the personal self. The mechanism for the spiritual evolution of man is through a long series of incarnations, where the experiences of each personality during life on the physical plane are assimilated by the permanent reincarnating ego or monad between lives in Devachan. So Devachan is the idealized and subjective state of blissful reward for the life just gone. Although subjective, it is very real to the person concerned, and is perhaps less subjective than our own physical lives. HPB says that in Devachan we can develop further any faculty which we loved and strove after during life, providing it's concerned with abstract and ideal things such as music, painting, poetry, etc. The law of karma acts to provide each successive personality with the consequences, painful or otherwise, of the actions of itself and its predecessors, and thus the ego or monad gradually learns and evolves. Karma is an essential part of the evolutionary process, since without consequences for wrongful or meritorious actions and thoughts, the monad wouldn't learn from the experiences gained by its successive personalities through the operation of free will. This interaction with the environment and other people on the physical plane is essential to spiritual development at the current stage of human evolution. First phase of man's evolutionary development is the preparation and perfecting of the physical form and the higher vehicles of manifestation. In the early stages of man's evolution, the animal desires and appetites have free rein, aided by the lower mind, and the karmic consequences are equally fierce and heavy. This first phase is characterized, Geoffrey Farthing says, by a fierce selfishness and animal desire to live of the personality. That's from his book, Deity, Cosmos and Man. The second phase is one where the personality is brought increasingly under the control and direction of the ego or monad. Gradually, under the constant upward pressure of the spirit, the higher self begins to look beyond the immediate desires of the body and ultimately will be successful in bringing the personality under the control of the monad. So we now move on to chains, globes, rounds, and root races, which may sound like a foreign language if you're not versed in theosophical thought, but I hope to explain a little bit about it. HPB has written extensively about the spiritual origins and history of mankind, devoting the whole of the second volume of the Secret Doctrine, Anthropogenesis, to this subject. It is through the mechanisms of chains, rounds, and root races that the various evolutionary forces, which I referred to earlier, are played out. This is a very large subject in its own right, so we only have time to touch on it. This diagram, which I've taken from the website Blavatsky theosophy.com, illustrates the chain of globes of the Earth chain as set out in the Secret Doctrine. A chain of globes comprises a physical planet, which you can see here in red, that's the Earth, and 6 other globes on 3 planes of being. The evolutionary life wave passes around all 7 globes to form a round. So that's 1 round. And this happens 7 times in a chain, so that collectively there are 7 rounds in a chain. It's important to note that this diagram is only symbolic. The globes, like the principles of man, all occupy the same space. Of the 7 globes that form the Earth chain, only this Earth itself is perceptible to the normal senses, the other 6 being on planes beyond present reach. Each round sees humanity reaching a significantly higher level of evolution, both inward and outward, but the inward being the most important. So the outward is moving down to physical and the inward back towards the center of being. The round begins on the first globe of a chain and causes that globe to become active and alive. The life wave then passes on to the second and the third, and you can see that it's the Earth that's the present home for the life wave. We are currently on the 4th globe of our chain, as I've mentioned, and this chain is in its 4th round. 7 major epochs of civilization occur on each globe. Those are the 7 root races, since each of them sees a new major race or type of humanity coming to the forefront and predominating. This current period of our Earth civilization is its 5th successive major epoch, termed the 5th root race. Just to note that root races don't refer to ethnicities. They are the different evolutionary stages man goes through on the planet. The same individualities are reincarnated in each. Root race has 7 sub-races, and we are currently in the 5th sub-race. All of this is set out in considerable detail in the 2nd volume of the Secret Doctrine. But the key point for this purpose is not the detail, but to say that evolution follows a clearly defined process and path in this planet and solar system. So we've now just passed the turning point to the ascending arc, where the higher ego begins to bring the personality under control. All of these processes take immense periods of time, millions of years. This is humanity's evolutionary pilgrimage. The cycles of matter will be succeeded by cycles of spirituality and a fully developed mind. On the law of parallel history and races, the majority of the future mankind will be composed of glorious adepts. Humanity is the child of cyclic destiny, and not one of its units can escape its unconscious mission or get rid of the burden of its cooperative work with nature. Thus will mankind, race after race, perform its appointed cycle pilgrimage. So in this quote, HPB gives us our task and our marching orders. Much of this talk has been about the why and the how we got to mankind's present position. But what of the future? The onward path, the path to self-realization, enlightenment, nirvana, becoming one with the reality behind everything. The next goal of the ego in the evolutionary journey is to become master of the lower principles and merge with the spiritual monad in full consciousness. This includes the realization of the non-separateness of oneself from all that lives and has its being, and realization in reality is different from knowing about it in theory. And I hasten to say that none of this comes from personal knowledge. Pablo Sender says this: the important point to keep in mind is that consciousness, as we know it, is not the highest possible state in the universe. The individual consciousness is possible only as a result of a limitation or fragmentation within the one absolute consciousness. Many paths to the same goal are described in esoteric Buddhism, Raja Yoga, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, Christian mysticism, and the theosophical treatises such as The Voice of the Silence, At the Feet of the Master, and in many other works. Truly we are gods in the making. To quote from HPB's collected writings, the most spiritual, i.e. the highest and divinest aspirations of every personality follow Buddhi and the seventh principle into devachan after the death of each personality along the line of rebirths, and become part and parcel of the monad. The personality fades out, disappearing before the occurrence of the evolution of the new personality, rebirth, out of devachan. But the individuality of the spirit soul is preserved to the end of the great cycle, the Mahamanvantara, when each ego enters paranirvana or is merged in Parabrahm. That such spirits or units have and must preserve their divine, not human individualities is shown in the fact that however long the night of Brahma, or even the universal pralaya, yet when it ends, the same individual divine monad resumes its majestic path of evolution, though on a higher, hundredfold perfected and more pure chain of earths than before, and brings with it all the essence of compound spiritualities from its previous countless rebirths. This is truly an awe-inspiring future which is held out for mankind, however distant we may be from it at the moment. So I'm conscious that I've bombarded you with quite a lot of information, so here are some key points or takeaways. A summary in 7 points. First one is a bit poetic, but I think it represents how I see it. The ever-flowing river of evolution is at the heart of esoteric philosophy. Physical evolution is a reflection of a vast scheme of spiritual evolution, driven by upward pressure from the indwelling spirit, or monad. Your spirit, the monad, evolves from undifferentiated, unconscious spiritual essence to consciousness and then self-consciousness. And it does this through engagement in the kingdoms of nature as part of its obligatory pilgrimage through the cycle of incarnation. In man, the monad is joined by mind or manas and begins a long series of incarnations in which the potentialities of the spirit are unfolded, checked by karma, and the personality or lower nature is brought under control by the conscious effort of the individual. The cycle of incarnations takes place within a structured scheme of chains, globes, and root races. The path to enlightenment is to become master of the lower principles and merge with the spiritual monad in full consciousness, with the realization of the non-separateness of oneself from all that lives and has its being. And lastly, the future of mankind is a future which has no limits. I'll conclude with a poem by Rumi. Many of you will know this poet. His full name was Jalal al-Din Muhammad Rumi, who was a 13th century Persian. I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to animal. I died as animal and I was human. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet once more I shall die human, to soar with angels, blessed above. And when I sacrifice my angel soul, I shall become what no mind ever conceived. As a human, I will die once more. Reborn, I will with the angels soar. And when I let my angel body go, I shall be more than mortal mind can know. Thank you.